We've got some news. If you've been paying attention to any of your emails or our social media or anything like that, you know we're moving again. Yes, again. Here we go. We are moving back to the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Some of you maybe have never met at the Seventh-day Adventist Church. It's right across from Walgreens over by Starbucks there on 33. Across the street there. We were there for about 3.5 years. There's a picture of it. And then what happened is COVID happened. Anybody remember that? COVID? Yep. And so then we had to leave and then had to go online. And then just through a variety of circumstances, we found our way to Saturday nights at the Spanish church. And then we went to small groups, if you remember. And then we went to Saturday nights again at the Spanish church. And then we came back here Saturday nights. And then we moved to Sunday mornings here. If you're picking up what I'm putting down. We've been moving a lot. This will be the last one for a while. We signed a year contract, so we'll be there at least a year. So that's good. So yes, we're going to be there at least a year. Some stability. Woo! So we will be there same time, 9 o'clock. We're not trying to change up too much. So 9 o'clock. Apologize if that's early for you. And if you love it, congratulations. You get to keep meeting. But so nothing changes, just the place. We will still have bagels. That's all you need to know. We will still have bagels. It'll be great. And they have pews there, which are pretty comfortable. So if you have a hard time staying awake now, it's not going to get any better then. So just to let you know, we're moving and looking forward to that. It'll be a great thing. We'll have a whole check-in area for kids and things, so you remember what that looks like. But excited to get back there. And grateful for King's Cross Church, who meets after us here on Sunday mornings. They have been so gracious to accommodate our move here. They actually moved their service time just so we could do this. So just so grateful for that church. So when you see them coming in afterwards, just on your way out, just go, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Make sure that they know how grateful we are for their making room for us. And then the Seventh Day has been gracious to accommodate us coming back to their building. So lots of people looking out for us, so thankful for that. All right. I think those are all the commercials. All right, now I invite you to turn to Luke chapter 5 in your Bibles, to Luke chapter 5. As you're turning there, this past week, I don't know how many of you know, but our very own Pastor Kevin Holtz was honored by the state of New Jersey, there you go, with the Excellence in Design Award at the New Jersey Recreation and Parks Association Awards Banquet in Atlantic City for the creation of an all-abilities inclusive playground over at Tannum Park. Look at that. Look at that. Come on. It's amazing. And there's Libney, our wonderful Libney, who works in Robbinsville here. So not only that, Pastor Kevin, look at this. He gave a speech. Where is it? Where you go? Look at this. He gave a speech. Come on, let's give it up for him. It was awesome. Now, I really don't know how many of you know this, but he is a certified, official playground expert. He actually has certification on this. He is an expert on playgrounds. Now, listen, if more kids knew that was a thing growing up, they would want to grow up to become Pastor Kevin. I want to be a playground expert, right? And that's what they'd be telling their parents. Be like, kids, we got to go. Mom, I can't leave the playground. I'm doing research. I'm preparing for my future career as a playground expert. I'm just telling you. So congratulations, Kev. It's a way to go. As well as Joy and the rest of the township. That's so cool that we've got this inclusive playground. And hopefully it sparks that for other places, that we have accessible playgrounds, that anybody can play at a playground. And it's a really great thing. There's a show, we've talked about this before, named Parks and Rec. And there's a character named Ron Swanson. If anybody's seen the show, you've seen the show. There he is, Ron Swanson, right? He is the director of the Department of Parks and Rec. And he's generally grumpy, as you can tell. He doesn't like people. He does not like government at all, which is really interesting that he works for government. He's also very competent and handy. And he knows his way around a tool shop, if you've ever seen him there. And the actor who plays him, his name's Nick Offerman. He's actually got his own carpentry business. He's like a professional quality caliber carpenter. He's very, very talented. And there's a scene in the show where he walks into Lowe's, right? And he's looking around for something. An employee walks up to him, and he offers to help, and Ron cuts him off, and what does he say to him? I know more than you. The employee walks up and goes, can I help you with, and he goes, I know more than you. I know more than you, okay? So I just want to caution you. There's something about Parks and Recreation directors. If you invite Pastor Kevin to your house and you've got a playground in your backyard, he just may have a few pointers for you, because that's kind of like his thing. He might look at your slide and go, the pitch is just a little, the swings need to, you need a little more separation. Yeah. See, we've all got these places, these areas in our life where we've got some expertise. You've got somewhere in your life where you're in your element. So my question is, where do you have that kind of swagger? Like, where do you feel the most competent, right? There's this thing about 10,000 hours, right? When you spend 10,000 hours doing a thing, it makes you proficient in that and competent in that. So where have you spent that kind of time? Where do you feel like I know the space here. For me, right, it's a bakery. I know my way around a bakery. I walk in, I'm like, I understand what's going on here, right? We went to Eat Good this weekend, and I was looking around, I'm like, okay, I know exactly how to look through this case of donuts and Linzer tarts and lemon squares. I know what I'm looking at. We know what to ask. I know how to. All right, so what about you? Is it under the hood of a car? Is it in a kitchen? You know your way around a kitchen. Or is it in a library and the books? You're like, yeah, I just feel at home here. Is it in an operating room? Perhaps. Or behind a computer. Maybe it's in a classroom with children. Because some of you are like, no, none of these, right? Or maybe it's in a boardroom or a courtroom. Maybe some of you are like, you get your hands in dirt around a garden, and you're like, oh, this is my place. I'm in my element. Or maybe some of you, it's just shopping on Amazon. You're like, I know how to do this. This is my happy place. I know exactly what. See, it's good to have that kind of competence and that kind of familiarity. It's valuable, right? If I go to a doctor, I want to know that they've spent more time around medicine than the average bear, right? I want to know that they know what they're doing and that they feel comfortable in the room with me. If they seem a little unsteady, I don't enjoy that. If I get a haircut, right, I don't want the intern, right? I want the barber that's been cutting hair longer than I've been alive, right? I want that guy could do it in his sleep, right? Like that's what I want, right? So I think we're all aware, though, that if we're not careful, that confidence, that assurance that I know what I'm doing here can cross a line at some point and goes from confidence to arrogance. Because you've met people, perhaps, who are good at something and they know it. They're really in their element and they want to make sure that you know it. And they want to make sure that everybody else knows it too. Being good is fine, and knowing that you're good is fine. Making sure that others know that we're good at that thing is too much. See, one of the dangers of arrogance is that it limits our ability to learn, to grow, to be teachable. Because once we think we know a thing, I know more than you, the spirit of Ron Swanson comes upon us, and we slowly stop growing and we become content in our understanding. I know what I need to know. I'm good. I'm really good at this. You can't teach me anything else. I'm not listening. It's such an easy temptation, and it comes at such a cost because it costs us potential all the time. It costs us what we could be. We're going to look at a story today where Jesus has an interaction with some fishermen on their turf, technically on their water, if we're being accurate. And this dynamic, this precise dynamic here about competence and arrogance is at the forefront of this story. And it's the confidence of the fishermen that challenges their ability to be who God wants them to be. And they're faced with a choice, and more than likely it's a choice that you and I are being confronted with on an almost daily basis. And it's this idea of what we're good at and knowing what we're good at and when God wants to speak to those things. So hopefully, what we'll read today, what we'll learn will help us break through and break down any arrogance or pride that's in our life that keeps us from moving forward. So I invite you to read this with me. And as we pick up the story, Jesus has just begun his public ministry. He has no followers yet. He's just started doing a few things, a few miracles. He's teaching in a few areas, and he's got no followers, okay? No followers yet. We're going to pick the story up in Luke chapter 5, verse 1. We read this. One day, as Jesus was preaching on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, great crowds pressed in on him to listen to the word of God. So just picture this, right? You've got the scene here, right? He's preaching, and there's crowds on the shore. Now, the Sea of Galilee, I've got a picture of it here, is there it is. It's huge. It's really enormous. It's actually a lake. It's a really large lake. It's called Lake Gennesaret. It's actually known by multiple names here, but it's the same thing. It's 13 miles long, 8 miles wide, so pretty big, right? Not really a sea, more like a really large lake, but that's pretty big. I don't think you can swim across it. Maybe somebody can swim 13 miles. If you can, more power to you. Even 1 mile seems like too much for me, but it's a real. So there, he's on a shore, right? And there's people there, and there's this crowd kind of gathering. So they've kind of started to hear about this preacher guy, and so they're coming to hear what's he saying. They're curious, and they're coming. And he notices verse 2, it says, he noticed 2 empty boats at the water's edge. So at the water's edge, right, they're just there, and there's some boats there, for the fishermen had left them and were washing their nets. Stepping into one of the boats, Jesus asked a man named Simon, who was its owner, to push it out into the water. So he sat in the boat and taught the crowds from there. Now, just to get a picture of what's happening here, these boats are about 20 to 30 feet long. Archaeologists actually discovered a boat in that region during a dig. There had been some erosion, and on the beaches there, they found this sticking out, and it dated back to about the time of Jesus. It's about the same size. They actually call this the Galilee boat or the Jesus boat. It's pretty cool. It's so it's actually the metal part at the bottom wasn't there. That's just holding it up. But you see, that's a kind of about the shape. It's about a 20-foot long boat, 25 feet. So it's somewhere in that range. So there are these boats there. They would go out and fish in. And he says, all right, now the owner's name is Simon. This is not the first time Jesus has met Simon. Okay, now we also know Simon has a second name, Simon Peter, right? So if you know the stories, right, this is who we're talking about here. Simon Peter, right, one of the followers of Jesus eventually. So this is actually the fourth encounter Jesus has had with Simon, right? The fourth time. The first time Simon heard about Jesus from his brother Andrew. It says Andrew is out, sees Jesus teaching, and he goes and tells his brother about him. Then Andrew brings Simon at one point to meet Jesus. So he heard about him from his brother. Then he actually gets to meet him. And then the third time, Jesus is actually at Simon's house, and his mother-in-law is sick. And Jesus heals his mother-in-law. She's got like a fever, says he heals her, and she gets up and she starts cooking, and he heals her. So this now is the fourth time that he's meeting him. And despite all those things that have happened, Simon's really not a believer yet. So he's seen Jesus, he's heard Jesus, but he's really not sure what to do with this guy. And so just keep that in mind as we read, that Simon has met Jesus multiple times. Jesus is walking he's teaching, he sees these boats, he steps into it, and it just so happens to be Simon's boat. All right, keep that in mind. Verse 4, it says, when he, meaning Jesus, had finished speaking, here we go, he said to Simon, now go out where it's deeper and let down your nets to catch some fish. Master, Simon replied, we worked hard all last night and didn't catch a thing. But if you say so, I'll let the nets down again. And I just need to pause here. Do you remember what Jesus was growing up? What was his trade? He's a carpenter. He's a carpenter. Everybody knows that. Everybody then knew that. Simon knew that. And he knows that Jesus is a teacher too. And guess what Jesus is not? A fisherman. Now, these boats belong to Simon, means he owns them. Means he actually owns a fishing business here, like a family business, right? He has grown up in this region. Means he grew up on the lake. Anybody grew up near water? Like if you grew up near water, like you know the water. Like at your life is sort of everything is on the water. The lake was his life. He knew it like the back of his hand, right? There's probably few people who knew that lake like Simon knew the lake. He understands what's going on there. Now, as we said, Simon's had several encounters with Jesus, and he has respect for him. He owes Jesus. He healed his mother-in-law, maybe, if he liked his mother-in-law. If not, he's like, yeah. But he owes Jesus one. He's just sat in the boat while Jesus taught, so he's heard everything Jesus just said because he has to go with Jesus to take the boat out. Jesus doesn't say, hey, can I take your boat? He goes in the boat. So Jesus is standing. So it's a 20, 30-foot boat, not a big boat. Simon's literally hearing every word Jesus just said. He's no stranger to the kinds of things Jesus is teaching. But he's just spent a long night fishing with nothing to show for it. He's tired. He's tired. See, there are about 3 types of fish in the sea there in that lake that they would have fished for. One was like sardines, small little bait fish that they would have caught, with things. And there's another type. But the most likely fish that Simon would have been fishing for was called mushti. Mushti. Anybody like mushti? There you go. It's actually tilapia. It's a type of tilapia. So if anybody, you've had tilapia, you fish people. Bland, simple fish, right? So on this particular lake, to catch those fish, the best fishing happens at night. Okay? Oxygen-rich fresh water would flow into the lake and on the banks, and that's where the fish would feed. They'd come to the edges of the lake, and they would let down their nets at night, and it was dark, fish couldn't see them. They'd bring it up, and they'd catch the fish, and that's how they would do this, right? They'd been up all night, and it said they caught nothing. Been a bad day on the lake, right? They call that getting skunked if you're a fisher person, right? They call it, like, you didn't get anything. Now, during the day, what happens is that the fish would hide under rocks and things like that. You'd only use the nets at night because the fish can see the nets during the day because they've got eyes, right? So you wouldn't fish during the day, and you definitely wouldn't fish in deep water. And Jesus tells him to throw his net into deep water during the day. And if you're Peter, what are you doing? You're probably rolling your eyes, right? Hey, this guy. You see what he's telling us? He says, he's telling me to put the nets in the deep water during the day. Kenneth Bailey, who is an expert on Middle Eastern life, says this. He says, the very idea that a landlubber from the highlands of Nazareth who has never wet a line should presume to tell a seasoned fish captain what to do is preposterous. Simon calls Jesus master. He goes, master. It means teacher. But it can also be used in the same way we use the words boss or chief. You hear that? Hey, boss. Right, chief. Like, listen, man, I know you're special and all, and I know that you're a great teacher, but I know this lake. And there's nothing to catch right now, right? By now you should know what's coming, right? This is what? This is nonsense. This is holy nonsense happening right here, right? This is not normal. And this is ridiculous. And guess what? We know it, and Jesus knew it. And he knows he's asking Simon nonsense, and he asks it anyway. And then Simon says something so real and honest. He says, listen, we worked so hard all night. We didn't catch a thing. Listen to this. He goes, but if you say so, I'll let the nets down again. I love that, right? If you say so. You ever say that to somebody? Anybody ever say it to you? Like, there's layers to that, right? There's so much inflection that we can soak into that statement. I mean, if you say so, right? Like, you can say that with so much other things being said, right? I mean, if you say so, right? Like, it's almost like you're throwing it out. There's layers to it. Simon says, if you say so, but guess what? He does it. He does it. So he's got to literally row the boat from the shore where Jesus is just there, and he's literally got to go get the nets that he's just cleaned, put them in the boat, row all the way out to deep water. Maybe he goes even like to super deep water. He's like, okay, let's see how ridiculous this is. Let's go. Okay, we're going to go deep. You said deep? I'll take you deep. We're going to take you real deep. There's nothing out here. We'll catch a turtle. I don't know. There's nothing out here. Really, really deep. And he takes the nets he has just spent all morning cleaning because he was up all night, and he's prepped them, and he has to throw them back in the water. And I'm sure like part of him when he threw it in the water was like, knows, we have to clean all this seaweed or whatever is out of this again. Like, this is just, and if you don't already know the story, you can probably guess what happens next. Verse 6, and it says, "And this time their nets were so full of fish, they began to tear. A shout for help brought their partners in the other boat, and soon both boats were filled with fish and on the verge of sinking." So 20, 30-foot boats filled with fish on the verge of sinking. Never in all his years of fishing had Simon ever, and his brother Andrew, or their partners James and John, ever seen this many fish in one catch. They'd never had that, right? We're going to need a bigger boat, right? Like, never had this happen. This was like hitting the lottery. This is the kind of catch that becomes legend. Like, remember that one day, like when they're old guys, like sitting down, like, remember that one day we filled both boats, they were about to sink, and people are like, yeah, they didn't know. Actually, they were about to sink. Both boats literally on the verge of that. They even had to throw some back. That's how many that they had brought up. Now, just to be clear, you don't catch fish in deep water in the middle of the day with a net. Yet, here they are. And in that moment, something happened in Simon. Something happened in him. There was this awakening. Verse 8 says, "When Simon Peter realized what had happened, in the boat, he fell to his knees before Jesus, surrounded by fish. And he says, 'Oh Lord, please leave me. I'm such a sinful man.' For he was awestruck by the number of fish they had caught, as were the others with him. His partners, James and John, the sons of Zebedee, were also amazed." See, this instantly wasn't about fish anymore. It wasn't about fishing at all. Simon didn't ask how you did it. He didn't say, "How'd you do that, God?" He didn't say, "Wow, look at how many fish there are." He doesn't start asking questions. In that moment, he used a different word than before. He says this time, he goes, "Lord." He doesn't call him boss. He doesn't call him chief. He says, "Lord." And he acknowledges his sin. There's something about this miraculous event that clarifies everything for Simon, and he sees Jesus like he's never seen him before, and he's seen him before. Remember, not the first time. He's heard him before. He's seen miracles before, but this did something different. No longer is Jesus just a guy from Nazareth. No longer is he just a teacher. No longer is he even someone who has the power to do some funny miracles. All of a sudden, it's like, oh, this is the Son of God. This is not just a holy man. This is the Son of God. From a distance, Jesus was interesting, but up close, he was life-changing. See, when Jesus revealed himself in the place Simon knew best, when Jesus spoke his language, everything changed. Simon wasn't a theologian or a scholar, so the teaching didn't convince him. And he wasn't a doctor, so the healing didn't convince him. Simon was a fisherman, so God spoke fishing, and it clicked. So Jesus kept doing it. In verse 10, he continues. He replies to Simon, "Don't be afraid. From now on, you'll be fishing for people." So again, I want to point out a word change. See, the word that Jesus used originally when he said, "Go catch some fish," has this idea of hunting. Like you go, let's go hunt some fish, let's go catch some fish and take them. And he used a different word when he says fishing for people here that has the idea, the context of like taking people alive. Not taking to kill them, you're capturing them for life. Adding life to them. You're saving them rather than hunting them. And in that moment, Jesus showed Simon what he had been created for. See, Simon wasn't meant to spend his life catching fish. He was meant to spend his life catching people. And he would go on to become the leader of the church. Jesus said, "I will call you Peter," which means rock in that language, in Greek, right? That he promised to, "You will be the rock that I will found the church on. On this rock I will found the church." Peter became that. He was just a fisherman, but he was not just a fisherman. And Jesus spoke that into him. He didn't just... I don't think Peter just accidentally stepped into Simon's boat that day. He wasn't just walking along teaching. He's like, "Oh, look, here's 2 boats. I'll take one." I think he came for that boat. He stepped into his boat on purpose. He knew what he was doing, and he was coming for him. And still in this moment now, in the boat, surrounded by fish, had this realization, still Simon has a decision to make. They got a boat full of fish, which is worth a lot of money. Worth a lot of money. It was his to do with it, what he wanted to do. And between there and the shore, he's now got a choice to make. Do I follow Jesus? Do I follow him like he's asking me? Or do I try to capitalize on this great thing of fish and that sweet fishing spot Jesus just showed me, that I'm going to now, go back there every day, right? Do I go back? What do you do? What would you do in that moment? If you were faced with whatever you've been working with professionally, whatever you do for a career, if in that moment God gave you everything, you hit the lottery, you got the promotion of all promotions, you got the contract of all contracts. He puts it in your hands. What do you do? He says, hey, follow me. See, because as soon as they landed, it says they left everything and followed Jesus. As soon as they land, it says 11, they left everything and followed Jesus. I was reading through my father's Bible that he had left, and he's got notes written in there. I've said this before, and I've looked at reading some of the notes, and there's a note in here about this particular thing. He says he wrote the first test of God was whether Simon Peter would respect God's authority or his own knowledge. He got to pick. If you say so he passed that test. He says, but the second test, here comes the second test, and he writes this: before Jesus asked them to leave their nets, he made sure they were full. Before Jesus asked them to leave their nets, he made sure they were full. This was a choice, not an escape. Here's the takeaway. God may prompt you this week to do some holy nonsense in the places that you know best, that you are most familiar with, so that you can know him like you've never known him before. Because God can work in all sorts of ways, and you go, that's interesting, and I've seen it from a distance, and I get that, but it's going to require you to make a choice when God speaks your language. Is your life meant to be spent for your purposes? For what you want it to be? Or will you leave that behind and follow him wherever he leads you? God is going to come into your life. I'm just warning you. He's telling you here, I'm going to come into your life, in your language. And I'm going to speak to you there. C.S. Lewis said there are only two kinds of people in the end: those who say to God, thy will to God, and those to whom God says in the end, thy will be done. This was Peter's come to Jesus moment. We talk about that. A come to Jesus moment. This was it for Peter. This was the definitive moment in his life. See, when the Son of God comes to you, he welcomes you to follow, and you don't have to. You get to, but you don't have to. And perhaps it's going to leave you with a full net. So what about us? Maybe today you've heard about Jesus. You've been around church. You've heard about how God works in the lives of others. But you've never really experienced it for yourself like that. You're like Peter, like you've been around God a lot. You've heard a lot of these things. You've seen him do things in others, but it's never really been deeply personal for you. It's always been kind of on the peripheral. And maybe you're tired of hearing about God secondhand. And you want to encounter God in a life-changing way yourself. Do you feel like perhaps as you're sitting here today, I'm just doing a job? Just going through things. But I don't know that I was made for this. Listen, God didn't waste that time. He didn't say, hey, this is not what you were, all of that time that Peter spent fishing was formative. God doesn't waste a season of our life. But if you don't feel like you've awakened fully to what God wants to do in and through you, you've been working hard and working, and yet you still feel like there's just something missing. There's just not this sense of purpose in it that you know is something greater. God is coming for your boat. And this week, he's just going to step into it. I'm going to invite the team to come back up. I just want to encourage you. God is coming for your boat, and he's going to step into it. And he may prompt you to do some holy nonsense, specifically in the places that you are most familiar with. He's going to tell you to do things. You go, no, that's God. Listen, I've been doing this for a long time. I know this is how it works in our marriage. This is what I do, God. I know how this works. If I do this, it's not going to work. But God's going to say, hey, it's holy nonsense. Or he's going to come into your business and say, no, I know you don't do business that way, but I'm going to ask you to do it that way now. And you go, God, I've been doing this for a long time. You get the holy stuff, I get that, but you don't understand my office, my bosses, my responsibilities. You don't understand my environment. Holy nonsense. And then God's going to walk into just about every setting for you, wherever it is, and you're going to be faced with a decision, and in that moment, here's what's going to happen. Your inner Ron Swanson is going to want to say to God, I know more than you. I know more than you, God. This is ridiculous. I've been doing this forever, and I know how this works, and that won't change things, God. That won't help. That won't make it better. That's only going to create more work for me. It's only going to make it more complicated, more difficult. People won't understand. They're going to look at me cross-eyed and say, what are you doing? Peter, you know better than to put your net down in deep water. What's wrong with you? And I want to encourage you. You may not be the most spiritual, holy person, and that's okay. But there are 4 words that if you'll say them, have the potential to be game-changing, and these are those 4 words, if you say so. If that's as spiritual as you can get, let me tell you, it's good enough for Jesus. If you say so. If you say so, don't want to do this. But you throw it in that anyway. You can even throw it in anger. He probably took the net and he was like, ugh, stupid net. It worked for Simon, and it's going to work for you and me. Let's go where it's deeper. Let's put down our nets in the middle of the day when no fish are likely. Let's watch what God does. Holy nonsense. God, this makes no sense. Doesn't work. But here's the deal. If we'll do that, if we will be obedient to God in the places that we know best, here's what's going to happen. You ready for this? You're going to see God like you've never seen him before. You can experience God and go, wow. Because he's finally speaking your language. Not just church language, your language. See, Jesus didn't come and do this in a synagogue. He didn't do this during a sermon. He did it on a day of the week in a morning after a long day of work. He's going to come into your ordinary, normal, everyday life, and he wants to do it there. God does not only act for 1 hour on a Sunday morning. He shows up right where we are all week long. He speaks to us in those places. If you will put your faith in action, you will never be the same again. See, God is eager to bring you to a new place with him. He wants to awaken you to who you were made to be. He's got something more for you, and you can only get there by seeing him for yourself. We're made for more. It's time we stop just existing. Really start living. Let's be like Simon. Respond to God when he comes into our boat.